Could you just describe for us a little bit more about your industry, some of the major challenges you're facing in risk and compliance, and yeah.
Okay, so I work at CIBC, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, which is a large global financial institution based in Canada. Our head office is in Toronto, and so we have presence worldwide, but mainly Canada and the U.S., and we're expanding in the U.S. right now. In terms of sort of risks or challenges and things with risk and compliance, there's two components that right now we don't have a good aggregated view of risks across the organization, and I don't think we're alone in that, but we've got these pockets of risk assessments that go on. They're done at various times, and we spend a lot of time trying to pull it all together, and by the time we do, it's after the fact. So that is sort of internally one of our challenges. Obviously, with the change of pace or pace of change, I would say, things move rapidly, and with that, there's more exposure, and we can't look at risks in silos anymore. Nothing is mutually exclusive. So we need to be more on top of that and with the changing landscape.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit of how you built out your GRC program and perhaps taking into mind some of those insights and challenges that the industry is facing?
So we recognized a few years ago that we needed a platform to support not just we had a control repository where we managed controls and deficiencies and control testing, and that served its purpose. That was coming to end of life, and we recognized and thought, let's be a little more strategic about this, understanding that we were having challenges in getting risks together and aggregating, and it's actually a regulatory requirement that we have the ability to assess risk across the organization. So we thought, let's take this opportunity to step back and look at what's happening in not only just the financial industry space, but also in enterprise governance, and made very thoughtful, conscious decision to, let's embark on a program, on a journey here where it'll be supported by one underlying platform technology. But the key is keeping in mind that technology is 20% and the rest is 80 is people in process, and so we needed to have that established. And more importantly, and it doesn't matter how good the technology is, you need that people in process in place.
Definitely. One of the things you mentioned earlier was around building out the GRC foundational elements, right? And having a readiness and buy-in from senior leadership. How do you think that all plays into the value of the GRC program and kind of what you're looking to establish?
So I think, again, there's a couple components to it. There's building out the foundational as well as having a roadmap. And starting with those pieces gives you the ability to sort of be the voice of eGRC, get it out there, engage with key stakeholders that are going to be impacted by this, and getting their buy-in up front in terms of what sort of the landscape of the program looks like. So the roadmap is one thing. That's where you lay out, come up with your use cases, criteria to prioritize, and see what the build out of those use cases are. The foundational elements, without them, I don't think you'd be successful, because they represent, I'll say, the spine, the backbone of the program within the technology, and what allows for to better simply integrate all the data points and information. So it's making sure everyone, you have a common organizational structure, process taxonomy, risk taxonomy. It's a lot of work up front to get everyone to buy into it, but when you get people to look beyond just what their own use case is and see from a more enterprise view, then the sell is easier that way.
Definitely. So as part of that, and one of the things you mentioned to the audience earlier was, CIBC has 44,000 employees and somehow a 60,000 node org structure, right? So a lot of people struggle and have challenges around how do they look at org structure, and that's just one example of the foundational elements. But what advice do you have for them? Tell us a little bit more about how you think those folks can really help to improve their programs.
Right. So I think it's having looking at what's in place and looking at the options. So as you mentioned, we have 60,000 org units. Not only that, but it goes to like a 16, 17 level hierarchy.
Yeah.
And there is no way that we didn't have to, nor did it make sense to put all those organizational units into eGRC. So we took a step back and said, how corporately are we organized? So we've got our CEO, we've got his directs that are both strategic business units as well as functional units, so revenue generators as well as the non-revenue. So let's take of those 60,000, let's take the ones that we need and structure it based on the organizational structure. And working with people like internal audit and compliance to make sure that how they align their audit, that they're able to then have the levels that they need within the eGRC structure, because they are a future use case, but they're also users of it now. Also keeping in mind that we need to think through the future use cases. So our initial deployment, we knew that we'd only need about maybe 500 org units, but we also were aware that as we build out future use cases such as op-loss data collection, that we needed more, like up to 5,000, because that's where we book the actual losses. So it's not just thinking with the blinders on in terms of what do I need today, but also what is that, how does that play out for the future use cases?
I think that's extremely critical, because a lot of people will have, just their team at the table initially, or they're looking at something and saying, oh, this is what we need for my group.
Yeah.
But, having audit, having compliance, having other folks there is extremely important as you think about the long-term roadmap and vision. The other thing about the foundational elements is that really sets up your reporting, right?
Absolutely.
For the future. So tell us a little bit more about kind of the benefits that you're receiving out of the system, some of the value that you're getting now that you have been live for a little while.
So I think, one of the objectives going into this first deployment was sort of establishing the credibility as we build out the roadmap, because if we blew it now, then I wouldn't be here speaking to you. So with that in mind, like we set the credibility, and which just bodes well for going forward. One of the other things is the reporting capability. So in our old system, it was clunky. We had to build offline reporting capability. Now, our users can go in and within, have a view of their controls, have a view of their deficiencies, and we don't have to be pushing the information out to them. It's more of them pulling it, as we say, teaching them to fish, and it's worked really well, and it's minimized their reliance on my team in terms of providing the reporting, and really, instead of spoon feeding, they're going in and helping out. So that's gone a long way. It's also helped streamline some of our own processes in terms of approvals and things. And, one of the challenges we had was, there's great workflow capability within the system, and I thought this is fantastic. We can get all our approvals online. We don't have to track through email. Well, that meant with actually quite a lot of resistance. But when you started peeling back what the resistance was, it was change. People, and people don't always like change. And, maybe we also realized that people that were approvers maybe weren't necessarily the right approvers given their level in the organization. So that has actually worked out really well. So instead of having audit trails of 3 different places, we've got, an audit trail within the application that represents even what our policy requirements are.
No, and that's great, and that's another thing you had mentioned earlier, the idea of, hey, we had somebody reporting into the CEO earlier, approving this control test, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense, right? So by actually leveraging the system, it sounds like you've been able to alleviate some of that unnecessary burden, let's say, on some of the executives.
Absolutely.
The other thing you raised around reporting, which I think is great, is you mentioned that the teams now have the ability to go source the information themselves. On average, how much time was your team in the past spending on kind of putting that together?
We for a while had someone actually dedicated that, because we had a separate database, and it was a bit, it was messy to knit it all together. And now, that resource is better, deployed doing other things. And, yeah, so it's worked out really well, and we look to build out more reporting capabilities. So.
Fabulous. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I think our time's up for today.
Okay.
But Sheila, thank you again so
Well, thank
much
you.
for all the support and the great work that you've done. Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
thank you.